This was one of the most incredible missions in World War II stories, a flight where bravery and sacrifice soared higher than the planes themselves. Addison Earl Baker faced impossible odds, yet led his men with fearless determination. Every choice he made carried the weight of life and death, shaping a legend that would endure beyond the war. Addison Earl Baker was born on the first day of January, 1907, in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in Akron, Ohio, where the promise of flight captured his imagination during his formative years. In 1929, when the world still marveled at the miracle of aviation, Baker enlisted in the Army's Air Service. 2 years later, in 1931, he earned his wings and his commission, joining a brotherhood of young men who believed the future of warfare would be written in the skies. Through the 1930s, Baker served in various National Guard units, honing his skills, learning the discipline of command. When war came to Europe, and then to America, he was called to federal service in November 1940. By early 1942, he had been assigned to lead the newly activated 93rd Bombardment Group, a unit that would soon become synonymous with courage and sacrifice. On August 1, 1943, morning came to Benghazi, Libya, with clear weather and favorable conditions for the mission. The desert heat was already rising, but the men of the 93rd Bombardment Group moved with steady purpose across the dusty airfield. They had trained for this and prepared for months, yet no amount of preparation could truly ready a man for what lay ahead. The operation was confidential, and only the headquarters knew about the mission, which they had named Tidal Wave. The mission was audacious to the point of madness, requiring unprecedented coordination and courage from every man involved. 177 B-24 Liberator bombers would fly more than 1,000 miles across the Mediterranean Sea over the mountains of southern Europe. Their target, the heart of Nazi Germany's war machine, the oil refineries at Ploiești in Romania. Without fuel, Hitler's tanks would stop rolling. His fighters would stop flying. The war machine would grind to a halt. But Ploiești was heavily guarded, with the German anti-aircraft defenses watching closely. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker, now 36 years old, walked across the tarmac toward his aircraft, carrying the weight of command. The bomber, named Hell's Wench, had its name boldly painted on the nose, a proud declaration of its crew's determination and fighting spirit. Baker was leading the 93rd Bombardment Group as the second formation in this massive strike force. The weight of command sat heavy on his shoulders, but he was determined to see the mission through, no matter the cost or the dangers that lay ahead. Beside him walked Major John L. Gerstead, a man who had already completed his tour of duty and could have gone home. Instead, he had volunteered to serve as Baker's co-pilot on this mission, answering a call that demanded the presence of those who understood what was at stake. The engines of Hell's Wench roared to life, one after another, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with raw mechanical power. Across the airfield, 176 other bombers did the same, creating a symphony of thunder that was deafening. The ground crews stepped back as the massive aircraft began to taxi toward the runway in precise sequence. At the appointed hour, they took to the sky in a carefully choreographed display of military precision. The formation gathered over the Mediterranean, a vast armada of planes stretching for miles across the sky, each carrying its own purpose. Baker held his position as the lead aircraft of the second group, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hands steady on the controls. The bombers flew low, dangerously low, to avoid German radar detection as they crossed the beautiful indifferent waters. They kept going in the same direction for hours. Eventually, they crossed the sea and reached land, with the mountains of southern Europe appearing right in front of them. The bombers threaded through valleys, maintaining their low altitude, each aircraft buffeted by turbulence and a wash of propellers from nearby bombers. Flying in such close formation at such low altitude required absolute concentration and unwavering precision. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and aircraft would collide in a catastrophic fireball of twisted metal and aviation fuel. Then, without any warning, the first disaster struck suddenly, sending chaos through the formation and catching everyone completely off guard. Somewhere ahead in the formation, the aircraft carrying the mission's navigator went down into the dark waters below. Perhaps it was mechanical failure. Perhaps it was pilot error. The exact cause would never be fully known. The bomber struck the sea and disappeared beneath the waves, taking the navigator and all his charts, all his knowledge of the route, down into the darkness. The loss rippled through the formation like a shockwave. Without the lead navigator, the mission faced uncertainty at the most critical moment. As the massive formation approached the target area, the lead group made a fateful decision and turned at the wrong point. Baker watched from his position in Hell's Wench as the lead formation banked and headed toward Bucharest, miles from their actual target. The mission depended on precision, on striking the refineries at Ploiești, and not veering off course toward Bucharest, Romania's capital. As soon as he realized the problem, he immediately reached for his radio and tried to contact the mission commander. Static crackled in his ears as he tried numerous times, attempting to warn them of the error, but no response came. Probably they couldn't hear him, or they chose not to listen as the formation continued on its incorrect course. Baker faced a decision that would define not just the mission, but his legacy for all time. He could follow the lead group, which was the protocol and the safe choice for both his career and his men. Or he could break with the established plan and lead his group to the correct target, and gambling that he could accomplish the mission even as the formation fell apart around him. His hands moved almost before his mind finished the calculation, banking Hell's Wench toward the correct turning point. He keyed his radio to inform the groups behind him, taking command of the situation. The 93rd Bombardment Group would complete the mission as planned. The bomber leveled out on the new heading, and in the distance, Baker could see the first signs of their target emerging. As they moved closer, they first saw smoke drifting from factory stacks, and vast industrial complexes spread across the landscape, and then something entirely different began to emerge. Bright muzzle flashes lit up the night sky, shooting across the field and letting everyone know the fight had truly begun. The German defenders at Ploiești had been waiting, their anti-aircraft batteries positioned and ready to strike. As Hell's Wench and the bombers following her came into range, the sky erupted with deadly anti-aircraft fire. Flak burst around the formation, black clouds appearing and disappearing in seconds, a constant reminder of how vulnerable they were. Each explosion scattered hot fragments through the air, sending deadly shards in every direction and threatening every aircraft flying nearby. The sound was constant, a rolling thunder of detonations that made communication nearly impossible inside the aircraft. Baker held the bomber steady, flying straight into the maelstrom with unwavering courage and determination. Beside him, Gjersted called out course corrections, his voice steady and calm even as chaos erupted all around them. Behind them, the bombardier prepared for the bombing run, focused entirely on his crucial task, determined not to waver or break. Then came the impact, a sudden and violent jolt that shook the bomber from nose to tail, rattling every panel and sending a shock through the crew as the aircraft buckled under the force. A large caliber anti-aircraft shell struck Hell's Wench with devastating force, crippling the aircraft and shattering the calm of the formation in an instant. The explosion tore through the aircraft's fuselage, ripping metal and severing hydraulic lines throughout the bomber. Fragments punctured the fuel tanks, and aviation fuel began to spray into the bomber's interior, creating immediate danger. A spark ignited the fuel, and suddenly fire erupted, roaring and spreading across the aircraft, engulfing it in flames. Flames quickly spread across the skin of Hell's Wench, fed by the wind and leaking fuel, consuming the aircraft. Black smoke poured from the gaping wounds in the aircraft, trailing behind like a dark shroud against the sky. The heat inside the cockpit became intense, every breath feeling like inhaling hot coals. Baker looked down from his cockpit. Below them stretched terrain suitable for an emergency landing. Fields and open ground. A chance for survival. He could order the crew to prepare for landing, could bring the bomber down while he still had control, could save the lives of the 9 other men aboard Hell's Wench. But landing meant that the lead group's error would not be corrected, that the target might not be destroyed. His decision was immediate and unwavering. Hell's Wench stayed in formation. The bomber continued toward the target, trailing fire and smoke, an aircraft already dying but refusing to fall from the sky. Baker fought the controls as hydraulic pressure dropped and systems failed throughout the aircraft. The fire was spreading, consuming more of the aircraft with every passing second, eating away at the bomber's structure. The heat in the cockpit became almost unbearable, testing the endurance of every man aboard. The bombardier's voice crackled over the intercom through the chaos. He called out the final approach, steadying himself as the target came into view. Baker held the aircraft steady despite the damage, despite the flames, despite every instinct screaming at him to save himself and his crew. They had to hold their formation. They had to hit the target, because this was exactly what they came here to do. The order rang out as the aircraft shook, and the bombs were released toward the target below. The bombardier dropped Hell's Wench's payload, and the bomber lurched upward as several tons of high explosives fell away. The bombs plummeted toward the oil refineries below, as other bombers of the 93rd Bombardment Group did the same. Explosions rippled across the refinery complex, massive detonations that sent towers of flame and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. Secondary explosions followed as fuel storage tanks ignited in devastating chain reactions. The sky itself seemed to catch fire. With the destruction complete and the target engulfed in flames, the mission had been successfully carried out. Only then did Baker break formation, finally turning the burning aircraft away from the target area. But even as he banked Hell's Wench away from the target area, a new danger emerged on the horizon. The lead group, having realized their error, had finally arrived at Ploiești, but from the opposite direction. They were approaching from the wrong direction, flying directly toward Baker's formation at the same dangerously low altitude. The sky filled with bombers coming from 2 different directions, all at the same low altitude, all trying to hit the same targets. Baker immediately saw the approaching bombers and understood in an instant how close they were to a catastrophic mid-air collision. Meanwhile, his aircraft was still burning continuously and barely controllable, yet he still had enough control left to act. He yanked the controls with tremendous force, forcing the bomber into a hard bank to avoid the oncoming formation. Metal groaned under the tremendous stress. The damaged aircraft shuddered violently. But Hell's Wench responded to her pilot's commands. The bomber slid away from the path of the lead group's aircraft just in time, narrowly avoiding what would have been a catastrophic mid-air disaster. The other aircraft flew past, their crews perhaps never knowing how close they had come to death in the skies. But the maneuver had cost Baker precious time and altitude that Hell's Wench could not afford to lose. Hell's Wench was fully engulfed in flames now, the fire having consumed most of the fuselage and wings. The heat was overwhelming throughout the aircraft. Baker knew they could not stay in the aircraft much longer. He pulled back on the controls with all his remaining strength, attempting to gain altitude, fighting to climb high enough for his crew to escape by parachute. The bomber struggled upward against gravity and its own destruction. Every foot of altitude was bought with tremendous effort. With the engine screaming at full power and the fire roaring like something alive, Baker gripped the controls with every muscle he had. But it was not enough. The damage was simply too great, and even his strength and skill could no longer keep the dying aircraft in the air. Hell's Wench had been too badly damaged by the anti-aircraft fire and flames. The fire had consumed too much of the aircraft's structure. Systems were failing faster than Baker could compensate, cascading failures overwhelming the aircraft. The bomber reached barely 1,000 feet before it began to lose the battle with gravity and fire. Behind him, the crew prepared to bail out, but there was insufficient altitude for their parachutes to deploy safely. They were trapped aboard a dying aircraft, and there was nothing anyone could do to change their fate. Baker fought desperately until the very end, never once stopping in his efforts to save his men. He never stopped wrestling with the controls, attempting through sheer force of will to gain just a few more feet of altitude. But Hell's Wench was beyond saving, her structure too compromised to respond. The bomber entered a shallow dive, streaming fire and smoke, a falling star against the Romanian sky. The impact came suddenly, a violent end to the struggle as Hell's Wench slammed into the ground with overwhelming force. The remaining aviation fuel ignited in a massive fireball that could be seen for miles across the Romanian countryside. The crash left no survivors. Lieutenant Baker and John Gerstad were gone. 8 other brave men lost their lives in the fire. Romanian authorities recovered the bodies from the wreckage, but the fire and explosion had been so intense that identification proved impossible. Baker was buried as an unknown American soldier in the hero section of the civilian and military cemetery at Ploiești, one grave among many. After the war, the American Graves Registration Committee worked tirelessly to identify the unknown dead from the Ploiești raid. But Baker's remains defied identification using the forensic technology available at the time. His name was eventually inscribed on the tablets of the missing at Florence American Cemetery in Italy, a memorial to those whose final resting places remained unknown. For his actions on August 1, 1943, Addison Baker was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor on March 11, 1944. Major Gjersted received the same honor in October 1943, both men recognized for their extraordinary courage. The citation spoke of extraordinary flying skill, gallant leadership, and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. Even after being recognized for his skill, leadership, and courage, Baker's story wasn't over. One last chapter remained. Nearly 8 decades later, in April 2022, the Defense Accounting Agency announced an incredible breakthrough. Using modern forensic techniques that would have been unimaginable in the 1940s, scientists had finally identified Baker's remains. The American soldier, who had remained unidentified for so many decades in Ploiești, was finally known. His identity restored and his story brought to light. On September 14, 2022, 79 years after his death, Lieutenant Colonel Addison E. Baker was laid to rest with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery. A rosette was placed next to his name on the tablets of the missing in Florence, indicating that he had been accounted for at last. The mission to Ploiești had cost the lives of over 300 airmen and 54 bombers in a single day. But the oil refineries were severely damaged, their production crippled for months, striking a crucial blow against the Nazi war effort. The sacrifice of men like Baker had struck a blow against the Nazi war machine that reverberated far beyond the flames of that August day. In the end, Addison Baker had kept his formation together through impossible circumstances. He had guided his men all the way to the target, staying focused and resolute, even as other crews around them lost their way in the chaos. He had completed the mission, pushing through catastrophic damage to the aircraft and facing almost certain death, never faltering in his duty. And he had given his life ensuring that other bombers could survive and strike home. Hell's Wench had truly earned her name in fire and sacrifice. And her pilot had earned his place among heroes for all time. Thank you for watching and spending these moments with us. If you'd like to hear more remarkable World War II stories, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next episode.